If you've watched any of my reviews of Hornby's Class 800 series, you'll know that one of my biggest disappointments was the poor standard of the coach lighting across the 5 cars. Having recently tackled the coach lighting on Accurascale's Transpenine Mark V coaches, it seemed to make sense that Hornby's LNER Azuma should be next. Hi, thank you for joining today's video. I'll be kicking off with some important messages in relation to this upgrade, so please watch through those. Before we get into the detail, I'll cover a summary of the tools and material required to perform the upgrade. We'll then do a hands-on walkthrough of the existing coach lighting and get into the implementation of the upgrade itself. After that, we'll take a look at the results of the upgrade and what decisions you need to make to ensure the upgrade meets your own needs and preferences. I'll then get into my final comments and any remaining points with respect to the upgrade. Okay, let's get underway. So a word of caution before we go any further. As the implementation of a change of this nature is likely to invalidate your warranty, you need to ensure your Class 800 train pack is in good order in every other way before getting into this, so that any pre-existing warranty issues can be addressed. Same as for the Accurascale Mark V coaches, the good news is that Hornby have already done most of the hard work for us with their existing implementation, and we'll be building on top of that for our upgrade in order to minimize the cost and complexity involved. The next point is that the upgrade I cover in this video will be fully reversible. We won't be making any changes to what has already been implemented, and it would be a simple task to remove the upgrade at any point in the future if you so wished. I will talk about an option to remove the existing LEDs as part of the upgrade and the reasons you may wish to do this. Only basic soldering skills are required to perform the upgrade, making it suitable for even relative beginners to give it a go. While I will be discussing the topic of light bleed today, I won't be implementing any of the required paintwork to address it in this video. Okay, so let's go through what you're going to need to perform this upgrade. With the approach we're going to take, we'll be using a 5V LED strip with a cold white temperature. You can get a warm white if you prefer that for the same price. And you'll pick up 2 of these strips of these for about £12 on Amazon. You're only going to need one of them. I use the other one on the Mark Vs from Accurascale. Basically, it's only going to cost me the equivalent of £6 to do this particular upgrade. You're also going to need current limiting resistors, one of them per coach, so 5 in total. The recommended resistor value I'm going to use is 1 kilo ohm, but as we get into the review, you'll see that there are some different options, so you may want to go with a slightly different resistor. And you'll typically pick up these on Amazon in packs for around about £3. You'll get them a lot cheaper on AliExpress, but you'll have to wait a long time to get them. And you may already have, if you already have some electronic components, you may have some of these resistors hanging around anyway. You're going to need a soldering iron with a fine tip soldering bit and some solder to go with that, and you'll see that as we get into the implementation. You'll need some fine wire, not a lot of it, only around about 5 to 6 inches. And you're also going to need some solid core wire wrap wire. That certainly is my preference for some of the fine work we're going to need to do on the wiring side. So again, you'll see that when we get into the implementation. You may have all of this material already, so that's great if you do. Otherwise, you're obviously going to have to go out to something like Amazon and make a purchase. I'm recommending some heat shrink for the resistors. So again, you may have this already. Obviously, if you're going to buy heat shrink, then you're probably going to have to buy it in a kit. And you're only going to be using 5 little pieces, even less actually, because you don't need a full-size piece for each resistor. So that's probably going to be a bit of an overkill. And but if you do have some, you can use larger heat shrink and just cut it down to size. So that may be a way of saving if you have some lying around. You're going to need some sellotape and some scissors, as we did previously for the Mark V upgrade. A small Phillips head screwdriver, again, same as before. And optional this time I'm putting down is really all with regard to the painting. And if you wanted to paint the interiors to address the light bleed, you're going to need to use at least 2 coats. You're going to be looking at a white beige for the upper inner body, and you're also going to be looking at a grey for the lower inner body. That's just in keeping with the colour scheme of the real life coaches. Now, I'm not going to do that as part of this particular video. If you're not happy with the light bleed, then you would need to look at investing in some paint. You also need some masking tape for the windows and a suitable paintbrush or brushes, but probably you'll get away with one reasonable size brush. So for many people, this upgrade may cost little more than the price of the LED strips, because they may have a lot of the other parts already. If you don't, and if you don't have a soldering iron, etc., well then obviously it's going to cost you a lot more. So I will include some links in the description to suitable elements here if you don't already have them in your toolkit, just what you might need to get if you want to make some purchases from Amazon. Okay, so we're going to look at an upgrade to this Class 800 coach from Hornby. So I've already taken it apart just to save going through the pain of that. So we'll just loosen them out here. Now you may need a couple of these little guys to help you, or credit cards or whatever, just to kind of show you, I guess, where the clips are. So there's one there, one there, one there, either side. Okay. Now, a couple of things when you are taking it apart is just to be careful not to damage these two contacts here that connect to the base of the car. So you can see there's a contact point in there. So my last upgrade we did was the Accurascale Mark 5s. They had a kind of a spring-loaded mechanism as well, but that was different. It was off the base. Here we're into the car. And these are coming directly from the rails now. So this is, whereas on the Accurascale it was different. It was a rectified voltage that was coming up ultimately into the top part. So there's a few differences there. Now you can see the wires there, so they're going to the contacts on the bogie here. And you can see there's contacts on each of the wheels. Now, the disappointing thing is there's no contacts on the second bogie. So there's nothing coming from here. Okay, so we've only got power on one of the bogies, and so straight away alarm bells always go off. If you've ever done coach lighting, you'll know why. So, okay, that's a bad start. Now, I haven't really noticed any flicker on the lighting on these, but the fact is the lighting is so dim that you probably don't even notice the flicker. And also, kind of maybe when we get into this, we'll take a look at the circuitry here, and I'll talk about the reasons again why possibly this performs a bit better than it might do, given that there's only contact on one bogie. So the next thing we need to do is take this out. There's two small screws. And actually, just before we do that, let's just look at one thing here. If you look at the front here, you've got the doors either end, and you've got then the seating areas in between. There is no lighting in those areas. You can see that there. So the lighting kind of ends within the boundary of the seating area. So you don't have lighting outside here, which you kind of do have on the Mark 5 coaches from Accurascale, which is good. And you have them on things like the Bachmann DCC coaches, for example. Lighted coaches have lighting in that area that's actually in the kind of vestibule area, and that's independently controllable in most cases. So just a gap. So not only do we have problems with the color temperature and you know the intensity of the lighting, we do have a problem as well with that. It's not the completeness of the lighting, if I put it that way. So let me take this little guy out. Small little screws, don't lose them. Either end, you're going to need these again when you put them back in. There's just one there beside the capacitor. Now, a positive is that there are actually 9 LEDs on this strip, so the uniformity of light is better than the Accurascale model 8 Mark 5s. Go from LED 1 to LED 9, so that's good. Now, the two spring contacts, they bring up the track voltage basically. So unmodified track voltage is what comes up here. It's rectified by the diode array here. There's a diode bridge here basically, and then there's a capacitor the far side of that. There's a inrush current limiting resistor just under that capacitor, surface mount 100 ohms. And then this is the main kind of storage capacitor for rectifying the power coming from the base of the unit. what's of interest to us is this guy here, which is a 5-volt regulator. Now the output voltage I've measured on that has been less than 5 volts, been around 4.5 volts, which would kind of explain why the LED lights are a little bit dimmer than with the same current limiting resistor as I would have used on, say, the Mark V's from Accurascale. The lights here just don't seem to be as bright. Now the coach area isn't as bright either. It is a kind of a grey. It's a grey area, and it's the same for all cars. And I guess if you're familiar with the Azuma, if you've ever ridden in an Azuma, you will know that there are different coloured seating and tabletops between first class and kind of standard class. In standard class, you get the very red seating, which would be very distinctive, quite bright red, and you get the kind of beige coloured tabletops. And certainly that's what it looks like in photographs. I've never been on one of these. So if you had this painted, the seats painted and the tabletop painted, it would give you a brighter look and a more interesting look as well when you apply the lighting. But overall the lighting does seem to be, for the same level of current limiting resistor, it does seem to be a bit dimmer, and I think that's down to the voltage being a little bit less than on the Mark V's, the actual voltage that's going to the LED strips. One of the things I want to do on this strip here, I guess, we are going to be overlaying our LED strip, so let's do that now. Let's measure it out. So I'm still using the same strip actually that I had from using the Mark V's, so we're going to measure this out, and we're actually going to add an additional LED at the very end. So I'm going to keep an additional LED for the very end, which will go into the vestibule area, and we'll get at least a little bit of coverage in that area. So I'm just going to cut this guy off here. Not a great cut, but that doesn't really matter. So we're going to be putting our LED strip over here, and I've got a bit of an overhang here, and that overhang is to give me a bit of coverage in one of these vestibule areas. So it'll just give me something I don't have from the existing lighting, a little bit of extra coverage. So that's why I am doing that now. So one of the things you can do, these have a backing that you can take off, so you can take this off and you can glue that on. So one of the ways of ensuring you don't get any leakage is, once you're ready to commit to your your setup, and you've got everything working, all the connectivity is working, and you want to get it nice and complete before you complete the installation, would be to take the backing off. It'll stick to these LEDs. You can probably use a little bit of sellotape in a few areas just to keep everything tacked down. And then when you install this, you should not get any leakage from the existing LEDs. And the only light that you'll see would be the light coming from the installed LEDs, the ones that you've added yourself. So I think that's something that you'll want, right? So certainly take a look at that. Okay, now we're going to be putting on this strip. Let's just get him out of the way for now, just to protect him. We don't need him either. So the most important connection you're going to make on this board is the connection to pin 1, that pin there of the regulator. We need to connect to that pin. To do that, we're going to need a fine tip on our soldering iron. So I've got a slightly different soldering iron than I used the last time. It's a newer one, and it came with a number of tips, and it has a pretty fine tip on it. So we're going to solder, do a bit of pre-soldering, get a tiny little bit of extra solder on there, and then we're going to use some solid core wire. So this is wire wrap wire. It's got a solid core in it. I'm just going to trim this a little bit, put a little bit of solder onto it, and then this is the wire that I'm going to connect onto that pin. And we just need to get a reasonable connection, and then we're going to train the wire up, connect the wire then to a resistor, which we're then going to connect to our strip. So this is our positive 5-volt output, which is going to drive the LED strip. And we're going to be feeding this into the current limiting resistor for the strip, and away we go. So that's the most important connection. So let's just make a start on that. So I'm going to get a little bit of solder here. I'm going to put a little bit of solder onto that strip. So I've got a little bit of solder onto this guy here. So So I think that's it. Okay. Now you could attempt to lift that pad. I'm not going to try to do that, and then that would disconnect the voltage from the internal LEDs, but I'm not going to do that. That would be a destructive change. So we're going to leave those powered for now. So the next thing we want to do is lay out this strip. And one of the things we want to watch for, the strip is going to end just before see the little hole there for that's for the screw, to screw this to the top, and there's another one up here. So this one isn't going to be in play because our strip won't be over it, but this one will be. So let's just put on our strip here and we'll see where she lands. And she's going to land in the middle of these two contacts here, just in there. Okay, so we're going to need to create a hole in here. I got my scalpel out to do it. If you have a sharp pointy item, you can do it as well. So we're just going to work a little hole in here that will be large enough to take the screw. There's no copper in the middle here, so you don't have to worry about that. There's a copper either side, and there's always a risk of shorting. So we don't want that, obviously. So you could break this all together and kind of wire across this area, but I've done a number of coaches already and they've all worked out pretty good just using this approach. Just trim it down. Okay, so he's going to line up with the hole there, and we're going to put sellotape over that to hold it in place. I'll probably put a bit of sellotape up the other side as well. As I said, we could take the backing off, so we could choose to do that now. So why don't we do that? Now I kind of let my nails grow a little bit long for doing this job, because when you're opening the bodies of coaches, it does help to have slightly longer nails than you'd normally want to have. Okay, so I'm just going to lay him down there. Okay, so you can see he sits right on the money there. We've got our soldered wire coming out that we're going to be connecting to. I'm just going to put a bit of tape over this section here. You don't see the sellotape. The good news is once this is all connected up, you don't generally see it. And just break a hole there. And so the screw will be going right through there and connecting in underneath, so we shouldn't have any problems with him. Alright, so if you look at there, we've got our little hole is going to go through, so that is going to actually connect down there. It's going to pull down the strip in that area, and we're going to have a little bit of an overlap of a strip at the end, which will give us the lighting in the vestibule area. So what's our connectivity here going to be? So if you look on here, there's no legends on this particular strip, but you can see the one over here, so that's +5. So we're going to come through a resistor and connect to that pad, and then we're going to connect the negative of this capacitor, which is over here, to that pad, which is the ground or negative. So that's what we're going to do. So let's just put a little bit of solder on these, get them ready for connectivity. There we go. This really does make life a lot easier when you've got a bit of tin on the contact before you go to connect to it. Okay, I've just kind of finished soldering this together, so we can see that we've got the blue wire there connecting to the negative of the capacitor. We've got the connection from a regulator. I've just routed it around here and kind of used the capacitor to hold it in place so that you avoid any stress on the joint there if we can. And then it's connected through the resistor to the positive terminal. So it's the positive +5 terminal there. And I've just got a bit of heat shrink on it there, just in case you've got any shorting against the negative roll there. So we're ready to put this back together again. So I'm going to pop this back into the roof of the car, put the car back together, and we'll kind of go from there. And we'll see what sort of result we get for this. Okay. Okay, so let's get into the results. Just as a reminder, I got a few snaps here of the existing lighting. So you can see the missing lighting there in the vestibule area. Here's, you can see the kind of red hue that's in that lighting. It's kind of creating the effect, I suppose, of the red seats, but the problem is it looks absolutely hideous in this particular view. And you just see that awful red all over the place. It just looks bizarre. And now this one is ISO has been pumped up so that we can see the bleed a bit more clearly. You do see the bleed even in a normal. You don't need to, if you just go in and look at this in a darkened room, you'll see the bleed very clearly. And again, you can see the really horrible kind of red hue on the whole thing. It just really stands out when you get into the darkened type conditions. We're going to go through the results now for a number of different resistor values for the current limit resistor. The first one here is for a 2K resistor, which is very similar to what I used on the Mark V's from Accurascale. Okay, so this view is a little bit blurred, so apologies for that. We can see kind of a lack of uniformity actually here, which isn't that bad. Actually, it looks an awful lot worse in the photograph. That area of darkness in the car there, one of the LEDs is actually in the middle of a kind of a bulkhead area. And you've also got areas of seating where there's no actual tables. And because this is obviously it's the lowest level of light we're going to look at here, it does have that effect of making it a little bit darker. But it probably looks worse in this photograph than it does in reality. It's not bad, and some people may be happy to go with the 2K resistor configuration. Let's just look at the next view. So this is a view with the same settings on the camera. I've just gone with, I'm running with the 400 ISO here. So it's a low ISO level and a 2-second exposure. And you can see that the seats are really clear now. There's none of that terrible red hue. You're getting a faithful representation of the actual colors of the seats now. And if you had these painted, obviously this would look an awful lot better. And if you had painted those tables, again, you can see that dark area towards the right. There's a number of areas where there's no actual tables, and so the seats are together. And also, as I say, one of the LEDs is actually in the middle of a bulkhead, and that's kind of impacting it. And because the lighting intensity isn't that bright. Now, some people may be happy enough with this, and really the next photograph here is to kind of indicate why you might be happy with this. Now, I've bumped up the ISO deliberately here to exacerbate and highlight any sort of light bleed. There's a little bit coming through the roof. You can see it there. And actually most of what's coming through the roof looks to be coming from the red LEDs. So we'll talk a little bit about that at the end of this section as to how you might really get rid of that altogether, as in removing them. So we'll talk about that at the end. But you don't see any in the body, and that's the positive of going with this particular resistor value is just that. And I'll do a summary of the results at the very end so we can see the relative differences between the different resistor values we're using for the current limit resistor. So this is an equivalent choice to what we used for the Mark V's from Accurascale. They looked pretty good. They were brighter. They had a brighter interior to start out with, to be honest, because they did have painted tabletops and the blue seats. And overall, I think the reason for the difference is the voltage difference. There's a slightly lower voltage on these coming out of that regulator, and it's making them a little bit dimmer for an equivalent level of resistor. So let's move on. The next one I did is I knocked the resistor value down to 1.48, which is kind of like 1.5K type level. So you can see it here. The one thing I didn't do when I did this particular car is I didn't take the backing tape off the LED strip, in which case you're getting bleed from those existing LEDs. So this just shows you, if you don't cover those existing LEDs, if you don't take the strip off and so that the strip is glued to the top of those LEDs, they will bleed, and this is what it looks like, and it isn't very good, unfortunately. Now, this isn't probably a bad resistor value. It's giving a little bit more brightness than you had with the 2K resistor. If we kind of move on and look at the next example, it's not bad. Again, the colors are faithful. You're not getting any sort of hues, red hues or anything like that. The only red hue you're getting here is the bleed from the existing LEDs. So that's unfortunate. It's kind of messing up the view here. However, when you go to the view, next one, it lights up like a Christmas tree. So there's obviously quite a difference here. This is one of the end cars, and I think these are actually worse than the middle cars in terms of light bleed. And the other factor which is making the light bleed worse here is the fact that, again, you're getting a bleed contribution due to the existing LEDs as well. So you just see it, it looks just absolutely awful. It's coming through the roof, it's coming through the sides. It's actually bleeding out either end into the vestibule areas as well. Again, I'm using a very high ISO here just to exacerbate it, but rest assured, you go into a darkened room, what you see is not going to be very much different from what I'm showing you here. You're going to see it pretty clearly. So now the 1K resistor is actually probably my favorite, and when we get to the summary, you'll kind of see why. Looks pretty good and clear here. We're not getting a lot of bleed. Maybe one of the LEDs to the right there is bleeding a little bit from the roof. We can ultimately eliminate that totally if we want to. I think you've got nice brightness. The seats look pretty clear. They look good. Overall, I think it's a nice level of brightness, and actually this is my favorite level. This is my recommended level to go with, and you've good illumination across the coach. You have a seating only area there, but it's not as dark as it was, as you saw previously when we looked at the 2K resistor. So there's better uniformity. So let's move into the darkness here. Now, apologies, it's a little bit out of focus. This does look good in the dark, and I think again there's good clarity. The lighting is good. There's no, there's no red hues and stuff like that. It does look good. Now, unfortunately, it does light up a little bit. Now, this isn't as bad as the 1.5K, and that's because you're not getting bleed from the existing LEDs. I did use the backing. I took off the backing so that this was stuck down to the existing LEDs and was blocking them. So you don't get that horrible bleed through the roof that you got on the previous instance. You can see that really effectively that bleed that we had on the 1.5K or 1.48K resistor was actually due to the existing LEDs not being properly covered. So you would have got a better result on that if they had been properly covered. You're getting a bit of through the body bleed there. You can see it pretty clearly. It's not horrendous, but it is bad enough. And the roof actually isn't too bad. And again, that's because you're not getting anything coming from those existing LEDs. Overall, this is not a bad compromise. So now let's go to the last example. So the last one I've done here is with a 510K resistor. So it's substantially lower than what we had at the start. And in my opinion, this is actually the best quality lighting of all of them. Now, I tend to run my lighting higher when I'm doing running sessions and photographing them for those reasons, so I've got extra lights for that. But when I've turned those off and this is just more a normal lighting situation, you can see the crystal clarity of the coach area is really good. Everything is well defined. Again, if those seats were painted, this would look really, really good if there was some passengers in there. It is very nice. And you also see the vestibule area where we stuck on that extra LED. It's lighting up that area as well, which is really nice. This is the best quality in my opinion. There's no doubt about that. This is top quality lighting. It looks really good. It's really crisp. Even in a kind of a daylight scenario, you're getting very nice lighting coming from the coach. So let's darken this down. We turn the lights out altogether. So we have a blackened room, and the only lighting, we haven't changed any settings on the camera. The only lighting is now coming from the coach. And I think this is really good. It's really clear. As we had before, it doesn't look excessively bright, but it is crystal clear. Very nice even light through the cab. Easily the best quality light of the four. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I have to say, I'm glad I did this particular resistor value, because it does show you, the kind of quality you can get. Now, there's more to this story, so when we get to the end, we'll talk about that. So finally, we're going to take a look at our 510 ohm resistor option with the ISO number pumped up so that we get to see the light bleed, which again you will see. This is what you'll see in a darkened room. The previous photograph, for whatever reason the cameras aren't picking it up, it's a darkened room, but when you up the ISO, this gives you the view that your eye will actually see. So you won't just see the very nice seats inside. Actually, you'll see the seats won't be as bright as they are in this. They're kind of blown out. You'll see them more or less as you saw them in the previous photograph. But you will see this bleed through the roof. You'll see the bleed through the body as well. Now, you're also seeing some red bleed there. So obviously a couple of the red LEDs aren't fully covered, so they're bleeding a bit out through the roof again. And you can see how offensive they are in terms of the light bleed. No more than most of the other options, you've got a light bleed problem here. And if you really wanted to rectify this, you're going to need to paint the inside of the coach. Okay, so the last thing I want to look at here is a summary, using those different values. So we're looking at the four different values we used. an assessment of the brightness, the level of light bleed, and the lighting stability. Now, the lighting stability is whether this light, the lights actually flicker as the coach moves across the track. And that could be because you're going over point work, that could be because you're going over a piece of dirty track, for example. And as we saw, there's only one of the bogies that has connectivity to the track. You don't have two bogies giving you coverage. You're relying on the storage in the capacitor and the regulator to avoid any flicker. So if we go through the first option there, you can see that it's a little bit dim. There is some light bleed on the roof, but it's not bad. And in general, I think you'd get away with this particular option in terms from a light bleed perspective. I don't think you need to go do any painting. And the lighting stability is steady and good. Equivalent essentially to what the cars are from production if you got them just out of the box. The next value, the 1.4K, 0.48K version, the brightness is definitely better. It is an improvement. The light bleed is bad. Now, it was even worse here because I wasn't fully covering the existing LEDs properly, and the lighting stability is good. With the 1K value, I'm kind of question mark is this optimal from a brightness perspective? It isn't the brightest of all, which is the next one, obviously, but I'm thinking maybe it's the optimal brightness. Light bleed is bad, as we saw, but the lighting stability is still good. And then we get to the 510 ohms, which from a quality perspective, from the photographs, hopefully you saw that this does look really good from a quality. It is the brightest. Light bleed is bad, obviously, because it is bright, so it's going to be probably the worst from a light bleed perspective. And the one issue I found with it is you do start to see some flicker. And there's two reasons for that. Well, there's multiple reasons, I guess. The fact that you don't have the second bogey connected is one of them. But the main reasons it's different from the other two is you are drawing a higher level of current. So you're going to exhaust that capacitor quicker. So it's not going to give you as good a coverage as it's giving you for the others. We could mitigate that. We could add another capacitor into the mix, and that would certainly help. Or we could change the capacitor that's there, make it a larger one. Another thing that I think would help is actually removing the existing LEDs because they are drawing a certain amount of current. So take those out of the equation. And that will also help the light bleed, and it will also give you, your LED strip will now sit more flush on the PCB because it won't have those LEDs pushing it up. That is a consideration, and I guess that's what the next slide I'm going to look at here is talking about, reasons to remove those existing LEDs. So if you're happy you're going to go with this and you're never going to go back to the previous lighting, well then there is a case to be made to just remove those LEDs altogether. They're large enough, physically large enough. You've got there's two solder points on them. You will be able to get them off pretty easily. And what it does is basically remove any risk of bleed from these LEDs into the main cab area, so you're not going to have any contamination of your white light. That white light that you have that gives good clarity, won't get contaminated, and you won't get any bleed through the roof either from those LEDs, which, as we saw with one of the examples, the 1.48K resistor, because I didn't cover them properly, they were bleeding very badly through the roof. But you even saw it on a few of the others. There was traces of red light coming through the roof, so it's very hard to fully block those unless you remove them altogether. As I said, it does reduce the current draw, so you will remove any of the current contribution that's going to those LEDs. Now, it is going to be small relative to the new strip when you're on that 510K ohm resistor value. It'll probably help your flickering a little bit. Whether it'll do enough to totally eliminate it remains to be seen. And obviously the fourth bullet point there is it just provides a neater base for your new LED strip if you do get rid of those older LEDs off the board. So there is a case to do that. It is a destructive change, obviously, whereas what we've gone through here today is not a destructive change very easily. Just you can remove a few solder points, pull off the tape very easily, and you're back to the existing lighting. So it's very easy to remove the upgrade as we've gone through it today. It's there, it's an option. I'm thinking about it myself because I don't like that red bleed coming through from those existing LEDs. It certainly is a reason to remove them, so it may help. So that's it. So for today, I am recommending going with the 1K resistor value for that current limit resistor for the LED strip. If you go with that, I think you're going to get a reasonable compromise. If you're not into very bright LEDs, then the 2K value will avoid essentially most of the light bleed problems for you as well. So as well as giving you the good stability. So if you're somebody who doesn't like to run with the coach lighting that bright, the 2K value is not a bad value either. I want to cover a number of important points here that I didn't mention earlier, and also want to follow up on the impact of removing the existing LEDs. Some added care is required with the front and rear cars. You should remove the nose cones and the dummy couplers before opening these cars. Be careful with the pantographs when removing and restoring the top body. As there are 4 sprung-loaded contacts on these cars, they can be a bit trickier to put back together. When putting back together, keep the base and body as straightly aligned with each other as possible so that the sprung contacts fit into the correct contacts on the base. The screw holes will also be in different locations to the center cars. I laid my LED strip on top of the screws for each of these 2 cars, which was a little bit messy to deal with, but avoided any issues with shorts on the screws. The first check you should do before testing the modified lighting on the track, using the +5 and ground pads on the newly added LED strip, you should check each upgraded coach for a short circuit. This could be caused by a wiring error, excess solder, or the retaining screw that is to sit between the 2 pads shorting out. I didn't find any on the 4 cars I've modified so far, but it's worth a check to avoid the risk of blowing the regulator, which then requires a more challenging repair. Another point has to do with the text, solder pads and resistors that appear on the newly added strip. And generally you can't see these unless you go looking for them. If they bother you, you can look to overpaint them with the same acrylic paint you would be applying to the upper body of the coach to address the light bleed issue. Just ensure the paint is dry before putting the coach back on the track. Lastly, I want to cover the removal of the existing LEDs. Use your fine-tipped soldering iron to heat up the solder on one side of the LED and use a very small flathead jeweler's screwdriver to get under the LED and ease it up. Once you get one side up, heating the other side and then using the screwdriver as a lever will quickly get it off. Here are the results I got for the trailer car we looked at earlier, which is now free of any red light bleed. I also swapped in a 1K resistor in place of the 1.48K I'd previously installed. The daytime photos are excellent, while the nighttime ones don't fully do justice to how good the lighting on this coach now looks. I'm really pleased with it. As we've discovered during the course of this video, fixing the coach lighting on the Class 800 is only a partial fix. We have the light bleed and bland undecorated interiors to deal with as well. Having more representative lighting in place only highlights these issues. I'm not going to cover these today, but if you've been tempted to do so, then please share your experience in the comments. Similarly, if you've done your own lighting upgrades to these coaches, please share what approach you've taken and the results you've got. I can't wrap up this video without asking the question as to what Hornby were thinking of with the LED lighting they chose for this model. The LEDs they chose cast a strong orange-red hue, which can't even be described as a typical warm white. As I mentioned earlier, perhaps they were attempting to replicate the red-seated internals of the real coaches. If my last 2 lighting videos have shown anything, it's that the cost of doing something right is hardly any different to doing it wrong. By simply using different LEDs and perhaps a smaller current limit resistor on each of them, Hornby could have achieved the same effect as this upgrade at no extra cost at all. Either thicker plastic or a few extra coats of paint would be needed to fix the light bleed, of course, and some appropriate variation in seat colour across the coaches would also have been good, as would have been extending the PCB and LEDs to illuminate the door areas on either end of the coaches. For a premium set like this, I believe these changes were warranted. So what are your thoughts on the original coach lighting provided by Hornby? If you'd be tempted to perform the upgrade, which level of lighting intensity would you use? The darker or the brighter versions? And would you intend to go the whole way and address the light bleed as well? As always, let me know your thoughts in the comments. So thanks for joining today's video. Please hit a like if you found this content of interest. Hope to see you on the next one. And in the meantime, take care and happy modelling.